Today on WTF, we are talking all about meat glue and the role of lysine and glutamine in making really delicious recipes, such as bacon wrapped scallops, a keto quiche, and a spicy plant-based chicken patty. Hello and welcome to WTF, where we help you transform food in your kitchen. I'm Janie.
And I'm Hannah.
Today we are talking all about the relationship between meat glue and the amino acids lysine and glutamine. How do they form a strong bond? And why that's so critical to making a lot of really delicious recipes. We're going to be demoing bacon wrapped scallops, and stick around because for the next couple episodes we're doing entire episodes around how do you make a truly delicious keto quiche and how do you make a truly fantastic plant-based spicy chicken sandwich using these ingredients. And Hannah is going to be walking us step by step through the bacon wrapped scallop process. But before we do that, we just want to talk a little bit about meat glue. If you've never heard of it before, link in the description below for our meat glue primer that we did a while back, and that's going to really dive into what exactly is meat glue, how does it work, all the different types, etc., etc. But for today, we are focusing on two main types, which is meat glue RM and meat glue TI. And I feel like it's hard to talk about meat glue without going into all the depth of it, but quick summary. So transglutaminase is a microbial enzyme, and it works together with lysine and glutamine, which are amino acids, and they coagulate. Traditionally, in the medical field, they use it for wound recovery in order to help encourage tissue repair, so it does all of that. But in the culinary world, we have used it to bond different types of proteins together to make meats. So Hannah, if you ever had like a ham, if you ever had a McDonald's chicken nugget,
Yes.
if you ever had a hot dog, you've probably already had meat glue many, many times in your life. And it's a really, truly fantastic product. And we've been able to use it to develop all different kinds of fantastic recipes. Now, Hannah, you've never worked with meat glue before, right? Before you started working here.
No, I have not.
Yeah. And what did you find, what were your first impressions when you were using meat glue? Like, what did you think about it?
I mean, it truly is just kind of a wow ingredient because, I mean, you'll see in our bacon wrapped scallops, it really is going and gluing 2 scallops, 3, 4, 5 scallops together into a log, and it really is a strong bond between the two meats themselves, and just incredible that it's able to make these proteins and really transform one thing into something completely different.
Yeah, it's really like one of the first things that most people ever use when they start working with modern techniques, and it really feels like magic. And the way that it happens is that the transglutaminase enzyme will work with the lysine and glutamine amino acids within different types of proteins. And these amino acids are abundant in your meats, your fishes, your seafoods, but they are less common, but also present in a lot of different vegetarian sources. And even milk has plenty of it, peanut butter has plenty of it. And when we talk about them, one of the questions that we get a lot from people is, can I use meat glue to glue together lettuce? Can I use it on mushroom? Like they're naming all these different types of vegetables, and we're like, no, there's no protein in it. But specifically, even if you have the protein, you need these 2 amino acids. So on the table here, we have a variety of different protein sources. We have chicken, eggs, peanut butter, rice, and fava bean protein. And you can kind of see that the lysine and glutamine content ranges from as high as, for the chicken, we're looking at like 4.8%. So that's a lot. Chicken's always going to glue together super easily, to as low as white rice over at 0.3%. So if you're trying to glue white rice alone, you're not going to be very successful. But if you start combining it with something else, let's say white rice and fava bean protein, which has about 0.6%, you start getting a better and better bond. And so this is important to know when you're trying to test a new recipe. How much protein, how much lysine and glutamine do I really have to make that work? And the threshold for that in our testing has been about that 0.6, 0.7% mark. If you don't at least have that much, it's unlikely that your recipe is going to work. Now, one of the most popular recipes that feature meat glue is the bacon wrapped scallops. This is a really simple, really delicious way to showcase the effectiveness of meat glue in different applications. So we're just going to clear the table real quick, and when we're back, Hannah's going to walk you through how do you make this delicious dish.
So we're going to show you a little demo for how you can make bacon wrapped scallops in a roulade form to increase the yield and make some delicious scallops. So the very first step in this is to use your meat glue to glue together some scallops, which I have already done and rested overnight. So what I did here was, this is 5 scallops, and I dusted RM on each side and then placed those sides together, wrapped it up really tight in this plastic wrap, tied off the ends, and as you can see, it is one log, which we will unwrap in just a second.
Yeah.
But first of all, we have our bacon that's already been laid down. This is about the size of the scallop roulade itself. So of course, if you're doing a longer one, add more sheets of bacon, but for us, 3 is gonna work. And important, you want your bacon to be overlapping just slightly with each other, so it's gonna stay wrapped around, stay nicely put. And another important thing to remember, especially working with bacon, is that it is a fatty meat, and TG, it's not gonna bond fat.
Yes.
It only is gonna bond protein. So as we can see, this part is mostly fat, and while this is more protein. So we really kind of want to focus on these parts and making sure that the scallop comes in contact with it, so we do get that nice bond. So we're just going to go ahead, and I just have a bowl of dry TGRM right here, and using a pastry brush, just going to brush this on. Another method that you can do is to make a slurry out of your TG.
Yep.
So TG needs to be hydrated for it to work. So a slurry is a great method to go ahead and do that. It is 4 parts water to 1 part TG.
Yeah, so I think if your protein has a lot of natural moisture, maybe the dry method like Hannah's doing right now will work great. But if your protein is naturally very dry, you might want to consider doing the slurry method instead.
Exactly. And another way to also hydrate, if you didn't want to do the slurry method, is to sprinkle some salt on the surface. Not too much, not enough to really affect the flavor of your dish, but enough to draw out the moisture that is within the protein that you're working with is another great way to hydrate TG. So we're going to go ahead and take this roulade out. I find it easiest to just snip off the ends with scissors and then cut it right down the center.
I like this particular way of doing bacon wrapped scallops because, and as you'll see once we start cutting into it, you get a very even roulade. So each proportion is the same. And I think Hannah already mentioned you're getting more yield. If you're doing like a catering event, it's a great way to get more bang for your buck without a lot more effort. So I really like that.
So as you can see, these scallops, there are 5 individual scallops, but now create just one log, and they are all glued together. They're not moving or breaking. So now what we're going to do is carefully just roll the bacon right around the scallops. And I do find it's easiest to do this with your hands. And once you are nearing the end, we're going to go back with our plastic wrap. And really, you're just trying to squeeze all of the air that you can out of this roulade and making sure that you're really getting good contact with the bacon and the scallops.
It looks like a lot of bacon, but because of shrinkage, it's not going to be that much once you start cooking it.
Exactly. And you can always trim down the ends a little bit if you don't want your bacon overlapping on each other. That is up to you. So we are going to tightly roll this up into a log and then squeezing both ends, kind of compacting it together. And then we're just going to go ahead and twist the ends off You could tie some butcher's twine around the end if you want. I have just been knotting the ends, and same effect either way.
Yeah.
But you do want that to be sealed.
Sure. And typically what we like to do, and you already mentioned it with the scallop, is that, you know, we like to let it rest overnight so it gives the TG time to bond. I think that's another question that we get. People are like, oh, I haven't been able to get it to bind. I'm like, how long did you leave it for? Like a couple hours, and that truly is not enough. Like the enzyme requires a fair amount of time. What do you suggest for people who may be short on time, you know, what they can do to help speed up that process?
Yeah. So one way to speed that process up is with heat. So since TG is an enzyme, it is going to react faster. It is going to create bonds faster with a little bit of heat. And by a little bit, I do mean a little bit, because at the temperature 131, anything above that, TG, it's not going to work anymore. It's going to become inactive. It itself is going to denature. So if, for say this, if you're a little bit short on time, you could put this in a water bath. Anywhere below 131, I'd recommend, say, 128, anywhere, or just a little bit below. And you can put this in that water bath for about 15 minutes, and that is going to start the process of TG bonding those proteins together. I will say it does work, but resting it overnight and really giving TG the time that it needs to make those proteins bond, that is what's going to really give you that nice effect, as you saw in the scallops, where they are really bonded to each other and it's not breaking at all.
Yeah, I think it's a nice tip for people who are short on time, but we always recommend the overnight rest because of the consistency. Because once you start taking everything out, you can really go backwards in that process. So you don't want to be like, oh, tomorrow we're going to take, you know, like we're rushing and we're taking it out and suddenly the bond's not there, we're trying to fry it and the whole thing falls apart. So you don't want that. Give it time if you have the time. Yeah. All right, what do we do next? So assuming, all right, we rested that overnight, what do we do next?
Yeah, so this is one that I have had rested overnight, and the step after that is to actually sous vide this, and we are going to sous vide this at 122. That is, I mean, the TG has already worked, it's magic. This sous videing is to cook the scallops, making sure everything is internally cooked before we eat it, of course. And then the great thing about this bacon wrap scallop is it is fried instead of baked like classic ones. So fried food is the best food.
I agree.
And so we are going to heat our oil about to 355, 360 is a good temperature to do this, not too hot where we're going to burn our bacon. All right.
So while Hannah is kind of heating up the oil and getting ready to fry the scallops, I want to talk a little bit about transglutaminase itself. And some people might be wondering, you keep saying RM and TI, what does that mean and what's the difference? And the big difference is that RM is a pre-blended version of transglutaminase that contains a helper protein, which is called sodium caseinate. And that's a dairy protein that's high in glutamine, which means that it's kind of already coming with its own amino acid and you're going to get a better bond. So in this case, for the bacon wrapped scallops, we used RM. And you're going to find that RM is the most common one to use for most applications. And I also know if you're thinking, wait a minute, you keep talking about this plant-based spicy chicken patty, so you can't use the dairy protein in that, and that's where something like TI comes in. So TI is a formulation that's just a blend of the transglutaminase enzyme with maltodextrin. It has a higher enzyme activity level, usually between 100 to 120 units per gram, compared with RM, which is at 70 to 90 units per gram. So you're going to use it in all your vegan, plant-based recipes, anywhere else, or you want to avoid any dairy proteins for any reason. TI is a great option. But because it has no helper proteins whatsoever, even though it has a higher enzyme activity level, it's not going to be as effective in some cases. It's going to rely very heavily on whatever your source protein's natural lysine and glutamine levels. So that's something to keep in mind. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more in the next few weeks. As we do an entire episode, we're going to walk you through how do we use TI in order to make this amazing like keto quiche crust. It's so good. I know we did the keto pie a while ago. This is like an improvement on that. We love it even more, so can't wait to show you that episode. Then also this plant-based spicy chicken patty, which is absolutely delicious. So stick around for those 2 episodes in the future.
All right, so we are just going to go ahead and do the same thing that we just did to that scallop, and take this roulade out of its plastic wrap, which we can actually just peel right off. And as you can see, the bacon is formed right around the roulade. It's not going anywhere. So we are going to take this and place it in our oil that's been preheated and let it go.
Yeah, and how long do you recommend frying that for?
I would say it's going to fry for about 5 minutes or so, and once you get the bacon to your desired doneness, then you are good to go.
Yeah, and while that's frying, do you have any other, since you've been kind of learning and working with TG for the first time these past few weeks, do you have any tips that you would recommend to people who might be about to get, they feel excited and they want to get started themselves?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say just one rule to remember when you're working with TG is you're going to want to keep it in the freezer. And so say if you're getting all your dry ingredients together, I'd really wait until the last moment to kind of go get your TG out, because you obviously want it to be active or else it's not going to work in your recipes.
Yeah.
So just being mindful of not just leaving it out on the counter for an hour and just letting it sit there, but that would be my number one thing, just remembering. And if you are not sure if your TG is active or not, you can always mix it in with some water. Again, I would recommend the slurry of 4:1, water to TG, and if you leave that there for 30 minutes or so, you should start seeing it gel up a little bit, and then you can know that it's still active.
Yeah, but generally TG is good. It doesn't really go bad.
No.
I think the few instances where people have written in, it's usually because they left it out accidentally, and then the enzyme got denatured. So that's okay. It happens at times.
And yeah, I think also just being really mindful of how much protein. I know when developing this crust recipe for the quiche, we really had to keep upping the protein in it, because TG is that magic ingredient, but it's not going to work if it doesn't have the right requirements in it.
So if you're like, I'm wondering how much lysine and glutamine is in my whatever content it is, so rules of thumb, if it's anything that's meat, seafood, eggs, dairy, you're probably good to go.
Yeah.
If you're dealing with any type of plant-based protein like tofu, rice, beans, I would say rice and any type of like legumes and beans, they tend to have a pretty good glutamine content. So that's why we use a lot of faba bean protein in our different plant-based recipes. But if you're not sure and you want to know, I would just say Google it. People have done studies on everything. We started compiling a list, but it was too long, so we couldn't do everything. But you can certainly use that as a place to get started. Obviously, if your plant-based source has no protein whatsoever, it will definitely not work. Like I think one of the common ones that people ask about is mushrooms, because mushrooms do have protein content, but I believe on its own, mushrooms do not have enough glutamine and lysine in order to create a really good bond. So, those are things that we've just discovered over time from different types of testing. But if you mix it with beans, it'll be good.
So we have our scallop all done and that nice golden bacon color. So we're going to let that rest for the time being. I want it to cool down a little bit, of course, before you go
cut into it and burn our
it.
mouths terribly. So let's cut into, I know we already have one made, let's cut into it and kind of get a sense of like how does it look once you started slicing it. And what's cool about this, as you can see, is that the bacon is not detaching from the scallops at all. There's a little bit of curling at the edges, but again, no big deal. The whole thing is still one piece. So you can kind of see how uniform this is. It's totally one piece. There's not really any shrinkage. So part of the cool thing about TG is that the bond prevents the proteins from shrinking during the cooking process. And you can kind of see this. This is a little bit of a tangent, but we do get a lot of customers who will buy Gloo RM to use in their competitive barbecue competitions to glue the chicken skin onto their chicken thighs. So as the chicken thighs are cooking, the skin actually won't shrink off. So if you're a competitive barbecuer or interested, tip for you.
Wow, that's really interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it's kind of cool. So this is why the bacon is not shrinking as much as it would if you were frying it straight in the pan.
Yeah.
So this looks absolutely delicious. I'm going to eat it because I love bacon wrapped scallops. Really good. You got all that bacon fat in there. It's keeping the scallops super tender. You know, it's sous vide, so nothing's overcooked, nothing is dry. This is really a perfect bite. So thank you, Hannah.
You're welcome.
And remember, stick around and check out our episodes all about the keto quiche and the plant-based spicy chicken sandwich. And until next week, from here in the Modernist Pantry Test Kitchen, I'm Janie.
And I'm Hannah.